I'd like to welcome you all this evening. I'm delighted that you can all be here to join us for this very important session to help us all understand what synodality means and how we can make our voices heard in the Pope's Synod on Synodality. My name's Eleanor Flynn and I'm a member of Women's Wisdom in the Church in Melbourne and the co-convener of ACCCR. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that this is and always will be First Nations land. Their spirit is forever written in this landscape. We acknowledge our part in their dispossession and recognise their enduring suffering. We commit to work with them for recognition, reconciliation and justice. And given that we're very interested in the Spirit working with all of us and within all of us, I'm going to read the prayer for the Spirit. Spirit of God, we come together with you as our guide, at home in our hearts. Let us be strong and true in shaping our lives and creating the one and only version of ourselves that ever will be. Let us follow the path of grown-up conscience and freedom as we care for one another and the world. We find our community in you as we find our own paths together, all following the light of love and justice. Even as we search for you deep in our hearts, thirsting for wisdom and the peace that is beyond all our imagining or understanding, we trust in you, Spirit of God, with us in every time and place. Fill our hearts and kindle in us the fire of your love, so that together we may change the world. And I'm going to introduce Bishop Vincent Long, a Franciscan, who I trust and hope needs no introduction to most of you. Many of you will know him through his writings, his preaching, his general activities. And we're delighted that he's here with us to begin this discussion on synodality. You will not be surprised that his diocese is one of the few where there are parish-led discussions of synodality and where there are resources on the website. Another example of his walking the talk. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you, Eleanor, and good evening, everybody. I'd like to first of all pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather respectively. Here in Harris Park, where I am, it is the land of the Darug people. I acknowledge their physical and spiritual connections to the land, their stories, traditions, and living cultures. I also pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you briefly and encourage you to respond to Pope Francis's invitation to have your voices heard. He has asked dioceses, religious orders, and other Catholic groups to embark on listening sessions so that ordinary Catholics can talk about their needs and their hopes and their struggles too for the Church. It is billed as the largest consultation exercise ever taken by any organization in history. But the question is it worth our effort to contribute to the Synod process, given the way the Church operates and makes its decisions? One seasoned feminist theologian has lamented the lack of ecclesial framework in which meaningful synodal discernment and decision-making processes can take place. Until the cleric-centered framework is changed to accommodate non-cleric participants as equals, she likens the exercise to the, inverted comma, structural impossibility of squaring the hierarchical circle. Perhaps the desire for a new ecclesial framework was the reason why the German Church opted for a different route to the textbook method that the Australian bishops had chosen. Many would say that such reservations are not without justification. The idea of synodality and co-responsibility means that all members should be given equal voice and opportunity as we walk together. But modern synodality is grafted onto the old clerical and hierarchical church where power and authority are vested in the ordained. The process of walking together can be fraught with challenges when it comes to decision-making and good outcomes. Our experience thus far of the Plenary Council in Australia has illustrated these challenges. Many feel that at crucial points, the process is controlled by those with power. So as the synodal church evolves, we need to address the issue of equity in ecclesial structures in order to promote the culture of discernment, consensus, and decision-making. While some of us might be frustrated at the pace of institutional reform or lack of it, it is indisputable that we have the most reform-oriented papacy in modern history. Against the prevailing culture, a clerical culture and mindset, Pope Francis has sought to expand the influence of lay people and especially women. His appointment of a religious sister as Under Secretary of the Synod is significant. Also, groups previously viewed as dissenting or even heretical by the Vatican, such as Women's Ordination Conference or New Ways Ministry, is included on the website of the Synod. One hopes that this unprecedented gesture is a proof that all voices in the church are listened to in the spirit of boldness, freedom, and parousia. As far as Australia is concerned, our participation in this phase of consultation has been rather lackluster. Unlike the Plenary Council, whereupon 17,500 group and individual submissions were made, so far only 250 responses have been collected as of the 2nd of February for the Roman Synod. I'm pleased to say that Parramatta is the leader of the pack by a long shot. Perhaps Australian Catholics are consultation fatigued, but as John Lennon used to sing, "Give peace a chance," I would plead with you to give Pope Francis's synod on synodality a chance. We have till February the 27th to make our submissions. I believe that we have the opportunity to co-create the synodal church that Francis has envisaged. Our unique experience of the post-Royal Commission Church, with its momentum for deep reform, can help determine the future of ecclesial synodality. The insights gained from the peripheries, I believe, are critical to the discernment of what the Spirit is saying to the church in the Synod Hall. Pope Francis has envisioned a church where the lay faithful flock will sometimes strike out new paths and lead the church forward. He affirms that this path of synodality is precisely what God expects of the church in the third millennium. It gives new impetus to the doctrine of sensus fidelium, stating that the path of synodality represents an indispensable prerequisite for infusing the church with a renewed missionary impulse. The Synod on the Synodal Church is not merely an event, but a process and a template for a new way of being church going forward. So I hope and pray that embracing an ecclesiology of the people of God that nurtures a more dialogical and ecumenical interfaith, ecological, and indeed cosmological reimagination, we can rise to become a more fit for purpose church and a vehicle for the gospel, of the gospel for humanity and for all creation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. That was exactly what we needed. Somebody who is in the midst of it all and who's able to explain where we've come from, what Pope Francis wants and what the challenges are. And I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Alyssa Roper, who's a theologian particularly interested in synodality and ecclesiology, and who I discovered at Yarra Theological Union and have foisted her into many talks and sessions. She's a powerful and really good presenter. So I'm not going to talk any more about Alyssa. I'm just going to ask her to talk. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Bishop Vincent, and welcome everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on the land of the Wurundjeri clan, and I pay my respect to all their elders, and I grieve for their suffering and commit to justice. I acknowledge that when we gather as Catholics and as Christians, there's many who are not at the table and many whose voices are not heard. I acknowledge those people who have experienced a betrayal of trust, and I pray for God's Spirit to be with us tonight. I'll share my screen. So I want to start with, why are our voices important? Words inform us, hand on our stories, express our hope, articulate who we are. God's word birthed the universe. Theologian Bernard Lonergan describes communication as being at the heart of who we are as Christian church. The inner word that is God's gift of God's love, and the outer word of the religious tradition. And these insights reveal there is a great depth to communication that goes beyond speaking words. It can be creative, powerful, it can reveal, and God's communication is love. Dialogue is a form of collective responsibility. Pope Paul VI encouraged the Second Vatican Council to focus on dialogue, and he placed it right at the heart of human life. This relationship, this dialogue, which God the Father initiated and established with us through Christ in the Holy Spirit, is a very real one, even though it's difficult to express in words. We must examine it closely if we want to understand the relationship which we, the Church, should establish and foster with the human race. God took the initiative in the dialogue of salvation. God hath first loved us. We, therefore, must be the first to ask for a dialogue with all people, without waiting to be summoned to it by others. And so dialogue came from God first and is a deeply relational and spiritual concept. Dialogue is evident through history and of God's redeeming work. Christians are compelled to join it. Thus, dialogue is essential to the Church being participatory, communion, and missionary. 3 words we'll return to. So, in fact, Pope Paul VI considered dialogue in the many spheres of life to be so essential that he named it one of his 3 principles of his pontificate. Dialogue, quote, a responsibility, a stimulus, an inner urge. The second is deeper self-knowledge, maturity and formation and building a sense of the Church, and renewal, a heroic and impatient struggle. And so the 3 concepts belong together in the life of the people of God. In order to look at councils and synods, we'll look at the Church's context today. First, imagining the Catholic Church through its structures of power and decision-taking. This makes it easy for us to mistake the Church for a pyramid, with the decision takers increasing in authority and influence as we move up. And the communications flow from the top down. This is a clerical understanding of how the institutional church operates, and it's hard to argue that it's not lodged in popular imagination. Now we imagine the church through its structures of decision-making. The Catholic Church has temporary structures, that is, meetings with pre- and post-meeting work held at semi-regular intervals to engage with the issues of the time. These operate at the higher, more significant levels of decision-making. The higher the structure, the greater impact it has, such as the ecumenical councils of Trent and Vatican II. The lower the structure, the closer it is to Christian communities, and the greater lay involvement may be in communal decision-making. What we have for the lower levels, however, are permanent structures of participation. Parish pastoral councils and diocesan pastoral councils. These are unable to produce decrees. However, they have far greater scope for local participation, subsidiarity, and creating a vision or path for its community, which may well involve adopting documents from the temporary structures and making them meaningful. So today we're between two sessions of a plenary council of the Church in Australia at this mid-level, and we're in the consultation phase of the Synod of Bishops Synod on Synodality at the global level. With the clerical imagination of the Church, authority is juridical, focused on power and boundary setting. The Church is essentially an unequal society, that is, a society comprising two categories of persons, the pastors and the flock, those who occupy a rank in the different degrees of the hierarchy, and the multitude of the faithful. It follows that participation must likewise split between those who exercise power and those who are treated like children. The one duty of the multitude is to allow themselves to be led, and like a docile flock, to follow the pastors. Synodality imagines the Church differently, renewing our language and symbols with a pastoral and relational focus. This diagram may represent more truly the concept of the Church as a communion of communions. Pope Francis describes synodal authority as an integral flow between spheres of decision-making that involve mature and inclusive dialogue. The decision taken by a bishop can thus be a symbolic and real expression of the sensus fidei, or the sense of the faith of the people of God. And he says, in a synodal church, the Synod of Bishops is only the most evident manifestation of a dynamism of communion, which inspires all ecclesial decisions. Participation is both internal as a communal discernment and outgoing as evangelizing. Pope Francis says, every Christian and every community must discern the path that the Lord points out, but all of us are asked to obey his call to go forth from out of our comfort zone in order to reach all the peripheries in need of the light of the gospel. And indeed, as Bishop Vincent said, the insights from the peripheries should inform and assist us. We should be learning, it's not just a one-way communication. So this is not a church imagined as unequal, rather it is an interconnected whole, a mature, discerning and co-responsible church demanding new wineskins. So why synods? The purpose of synods and councils, parish and diocesan pastoral councils, is to provide a space for hospitality so that our decision makers and takers may encounter different ideas and experiences and bring their whole selves to dialogue. This is a structural way of encouraging the sensus fidei fidelium, the sense of the faith of the faithful, to develop amongst the entire people. I want to share a quote which moves me and tells me more than any theories about why we should have structures of participation at every level. Bishop Donald Hying wrote to his people, "Our diocese has never had a synod. The Archdiocese of Chicago last held one over 100 years ago. Synods are a lot of work and are a significant moment in the life of the church. Why are we having one now?" In my travels around the diocese, meeting thousands of people, listening to your dreams and hopes, your frustrations and sufferings, witnessing your deep faith and joyous generosity, celebrating together at the table of the Eucharist, and so many other tables of fellowship. I have served the Lord alongside you. I have prayed with and for you. I can honestly say that I've fallen in love with you and this diocese. This is what I long for and what I think Christians are called to do and be. If the hard work of synods can bring it on, let's do it. The Synod of Bishops Synod on Synodality has chosen 3 themes that are core to Christian life: participation, communion, mission. These concepts are being moved out of the grip of clericalism and are being reshaped by the life of today's church, before theology has the fullness of time to reflect and before rigid structures are quite ready to renew. I invite you to consider how these synodal values reshape the 3 themes. If your parish has an intentional ministry for inclusivity and encounter with different people and ideas, then you are entering into synodality. If your family has a special charism of welcome, then you are entering into synodality. If you open your heart and mind and choose humility when you meet people, then you are preparing the way for a healthier church. So at this point, let us focus on the first theme of participation with an example. The Plenary Council question is a great gift because it provokes Pope Paul VI's 3 concepts of dialogue, deeper self-knowledge, and renewal. What do you think God is asking of us in Australia at this time? Our focus is drawn to the Spirit, and the question draws out a seeking of the Spirit and a response to what we might find. The opening line of my parish's submission states, consistently, the people of this parish have the same answer: love and prayer. It's true. Despite the crimes of sexual abuse inflicted by clerics on that parish and other insidious abuses, this process of prayerful dialogue brought out the best in people. You can also see how the 3 main headings and their contents, which I've truncated, could easily form the basis of a parish planning process and a wider diocesan-led review of parish life, culminating in a meaningful diocesan synod. This work is like a spark that can move a community towards evangelising. I'll point out too that through the lens of clericalism, these deep values and cries from the heart can't find a space to be heard or taken seriously. As church, our voices are different, and so are our roles. As Paul said, apostles, prophets, teachers, healers, etc. But St. Paul reminds us we are one in the Spirit. It is the Holy Spirit who provides unity, not our own personalities or plans. And while we're different, we are equal. In great contrast, clericalism sees the church as unequal. It condescends and diminishes the power of a baptismal life. The foundation of synodality is baptism, not ordination. Synodality restores to its proper place baptismal equality and the rights and responsibilities of all the faithful. A recent Vatican document states, "A synodal church is a church of participation and co-responsibility, according to each one's calling, based on the fact that all of the faithful are qualified and called to serve each other through the gifts they have all received from the Holy Spirit." If synod and council members work to weed out clericalism and identify those factors which diminish the power of their activity together, and if they identify, plan for, and foster the values of synodality, then authentic synodal participation can take place, and more. Participation builds community, and a clarification of and commitment to our shared Christian mission. This process is real, it's not an ideal. It's community building, church building, and it's how, with time and difficult effort, and yes, committee meetings too, we can build a sense of those fruits that we prize above all. Participation is the first of the themes of the Synod on Synodality, on which we're all invited to reflect and give our feedback to the rest of the church. I've spent most of our time here because participation is essential. How integral is our communion if we've been busy building walls with our own siblings? How fruitful is our mission if we don't even welcome, encounter, and dialogue with each other? Forgetting that the baptism of a child or a gender diverse person is the same as the baptism of the Pope. So when it comes to the theme of communion, our common baptism and our equitable participation may touch the vision that Jesus gave to us. I think that's almost a theme for me, that in my work for the church as an ecclesiologist, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. The fruit of synodality is not better institutions or more meetings or rules, as some people fear, but love, to better love each other people, God's whole creation, and our Creator. Synodality also demands that institutions and processes support and nourish the entire people of God to be themselves and to be love better. For if our structures don't meet these demands, are they worth propping up? The third theme, mission and more love. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Christian mission is founded upon the hope of the incarnation, which propels us out to share this good news. You have been invited. Pope Francis insists that every diocese in the world contributes to this synod. It's exciting. It excites me. And Vincent described it as the largest consultation exercise ever. What a miracle. It'll produce something. There will be movement. So some dioceses here in Australia have some very good information and encouragement for you on how to do just that, to share your voice. But for the rest of us, I suggest we go straight to the Catholic Bishop's website, which is catholic.org.au/synodal church. When you scroll down this website, which looks like this, there's a number of topics, information and advice on how to gather a group and discuss one or all of the themes and their subtopics. There is a big orange button to submit your response after you have prepared it. So submissions are important. Great value lies in doing this together as dialogue, as our collective responsibility. I don't care if you do it with your entire parish or with grandma on the phone. Explore one of these topics and share your voice with the church through your submission. Submissions are based on the 3 themes with 10 subheadings. They are open to everyone, anonymous if you wish, limited to 250 words, and closing on Sunday, the 27th of February. It's not too late. Today is the 16th. So in conclusion, the message I want to share with the people of God is that you are God's children. You are baptized and anointed. You have the right and the responsibility to participate, build communion, and live your mission. You are the church and you have a voice. Take up your collective responsibility to dialogue. Let us celebrate and deepen our identity together, and let us identify and root out that which diminishes us, especially for and with those people whose voices are not respected. The church herself in Australia will not be fully the church that Jesus wants her to be until you have made your contribution to her life, and until that contribution has been joyfully received by others, said Pope John Paul II to our First Nations Catholics. Let's own this statement and let's add others to the list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. As I promised all of you, Alyssa is a brilliant presenter, totally on top of her subject, and has given us a wonderful view of what we can do, how we can do it, and where we can go, and what synodality is, what the core of synodality is, the dialogue, the communication, and the love. So I'm delighted to welcome Andrea Dean and Kevin Liston as our panelists in a discussion with Alyssa as well. Andrea, many of you will know, is the chair of WATAC and has been involved in Catholic organisations for most of her life, I suspect, and is a very organised member of ACCCR as well. Kevin Liston, I hope many of you will get to know, those of you who don't know him already. He's an Irishman, but that's okay. And he's from the South Australian group, South Australian Catholics for an Evolving Church. And I thought I'd start by asking Andrea and then Kevin, from Vincent and Alyssa's presentations, what was the thing that grabbed you the most, that you thought that we should really take to the future?
Thanks, Eleanor, and thanks, Alyssa. It was great. And thank you, Vincent, your introduction too. It's very heartwarming and inspiring. So thank you both for that inspiration. I'd just like to pick up on the word dialogue. Now, I'm not sure if we all realise that dialogue doesn't just mean a conversation. You know, a dialogue is different to having a chat. And this may or may not be a parody of a conversation that I've had with a certain family member. It goes a bit like this. Oh, I'm waiting on those tests about, you know, about that cancer, whether it's, whether I still have to have some more surgery. And the other person might have said something like, I planted the tomatoes yesterday. I'm really worried, you know, that last lot of surgery was pretty serious. Yeah, the weather's pretty good, so the tomatoes should go all right this year. Now, obviously, that's not a dialogue. It's not even a conversation. But like, I think that sometimes we think that in a dialogue, the two people can keep saying whatever is on their mind and they just stay the same distance apart. Like, a dialogue should be something that changes us. So someone brings something to the conversation, the other person brings something else to the conversation, and they might still start a certain distance apart, but in an effective dialogue, we do come closer and closer together so that the original topic of one and the original topic of the other really merge and create something new. So I guess I'd like to really promote the thought that dialogue is really about transformation. And any time we enter into a genuine dialogue, we really can be part of that transformation. And if we could just let ourselves imagine that that powerful transformation can happen between groups in the church, between our dioceses, you know, internationally, I think if we could just believe that we'd have more faith in the whole synod process. So that's dialogue. I think it's just the most powerful concept. And if we could just believe in that and practice that authentically, a lot of good would happen.
Thank you, Andrea. That is brilliant. Kevin.
Well, first of all, thank you, Vincent and Elisa, for your presentations and your encouragement. It's absolutely fantastic. One of the things that I took out of that was the reference to the culture of synodality. I'm not sure if either of you used that particular phrase, but it concretizes for me very much what you're talking about. This collaboration, that there's a two-way process from the bottom up as well as from the top down, and we've got to make room for both, I think. Unfortunately, we've had far too much of the top down, to the point where I think a lot of people have become so passive that they don't exercise their agency as Catholics, as baptized members of our church. And I should add there that I think this is an amazing church. For all the problems and all the criticism and everything else, it is amazing. Some of the wisdom and the treasures that are within it are fantastic. But to release those, we need a much more active common Catholic. Somebody who seizes the agency that they have by virtue of being who they are. Christians committed to a Catholic way of living in our Catholic tradition, who have the Spirit within them. And I think this is something which Elisa referred to quite a bit. People are discovering the Spirit within as being a guiding force for their lives. And there's an emerging, that sense of Catholics should have agency in their lives. We need to foster and develop that with a spirit of collaboration. But at the same time, we should not, as happens with too many people, dismiss the bishops, dismiss the institution, dismiss the hierarchy. There is a place for the top down as well. And I think both of you have emphasized that and made space for it very importantly. And this synodal process is an opportunity for all of us to take part in that in both directions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vincent, seeing you're still here, there's a question that someone asked about the German synodal path and how it's different from the Australian models. Would you be happy to answer that?
Well, I understand that the German synod is not the canonically recognized pathway. Hence, there has been a lot of to and fro dialogue between the Vatican and the German Church. Precisely, there was a concern that it did not use the textbook method. The Plenary Council is prescribed by canon law, so it has a structure and a process to be observed. For instance, only the bishops have deliberative vote, and the lay members can only have consultative vote. So when it comes to decision making, it's only the bishops who have the authority or the canonical power to decide. So that's the key difference. Whereas the German synod is a ecclesial event, but it is not prescribed by law. So, for instance, the chair of the German synod is held by two people, a cleric and a layperson, and so they have two co-chairs, and both the lay members and the episcopal members have equal voting rights in this structure, and so even though there is a question about the authoritativeness of any decision that comes out of this German synod, it's the way that the German Church has opted for. Interestingly, in South America, they also have what they call an ecclesial assembly, and this pathway is even more inclusive in the sense that they not only have the ordained and the non-ordained sitting at the table, but also they have a certain percentage of non-Catholics and even atheists. In fact, only 20% of the attendees or participants are clerics, 80% are lay people, and including non-Catholics and non-believers and atheists. So that's another way of conducting synodality.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Another interesting question and a couple of comments I've seen on the chat about the fact that many of us spent a lot of time and energy putting in submissions to the Plenary Council, and why can't we just use them? Why do we have to start all over again? And there was a little bit of a sense from you, Vincent, that perhaps people have got fatigue in submissions, submission fatigue. Alyssa, why would we just go back to the old thing and not start all over again? Or
it's a really good question, and I really get it. I guess my hope is that the Plenary Council did move people as Andrea said, whether we're moving forwards or towards each other, or have some sort of a sense of more so of who we are as a parish or whatever particular group gathered and reflected on that question. And I'm delighted that groups like, classes at Catholic high schools made submissions. So the hope is that gave us something, that gave us some movement, it gave us some insight into our particular group. And here's something else that we can now engage with, that we can now dialogue with together and break open. How often are we asked, what is mission? And that's some feedback I've heard from members at the Plenary Council is, gee, there's been a lot of confusion about mission. And I totally get it. This is, we're not used to perhaps asking questions and going just a little bit deeper. So do it in whatever way works for your group. Pick one of these headings, move forward from where you were with the Plenary Council, and prompt perhaps your parish or your group to engage with some of the issues that were raised with the Plenary Council. Don't just leave it behind. As I said with our submission, every time I come back to it, I think, gee, there's so much opportunity there. It was a wonderful opportunity, but it not just for then, it's for now, and it's for building on towards the future. So that's my hope.
The other good piece of news, which I've just seen come past, is that the submission date has been changed to the 13th of March. So there's now no excuse for anyone not to put in a submission, because you have almost a month to do this. So that's brilliant. Kevin, one of the comments coming past on the chat is about clericalism, and how do we get rid of clericalism? How in a church in Australia, which is so very clerical in so many ways, how do we get people to believe that it's worth putting in a submission, that there's something we can do about clericalism?
Put it another way, if you don't put in a submission, if you disengage from the whole process, then nothing will change. The removing, it's a grand idea to talk about removing clericalism. But if you don't replace it with something else, another culture which is stronger, which is more authentic, and which is more responsive to the voice of the people and the agency of people, then we cannot replace clericalism. It's a way of behaving. And I think it is extremely important to recognize that we Catholics need to be far more vocal and far more assertive about how we think this church should operate. It is our church. I think it's an amazing church. I'd go back to the question about the German Synod and the Ceylon Synod in Latin America on the aspect of decision-making and decision-taking, as Alyssa has distinguished them. A lot of people in the church, in the organized church, seem to be very busy taking decisions. Great majority of Catholics have made decisions to disengage from the church. Decision-making is being done apart from what bishops or Pope or Vatican are doing. There is much more enthusiasm about the handful of people in a diocese who will go through the RCIA in a year than there is concern for the hundreds, even thousands, who are disengaging every year. We are in a diminishing church. And I think it behoves us, all of us, to get active, to say what we think, to assert ourselves, to take agency. Otherwise, nothing will change.
Can I add to that, Kevin, if you don't mind, Eleanor? Sorry.
No, please do.
look, I came through the RCIA myself when I was about 20. So full of zeal, I've discerned my path as being a theologian, something that I love. That's my service to the church. But on behalf of all the female lay theologians I know, it really sucks. It's awful. It's awful hard work. Constantly dismissed, constantly ignored, or people are afraid. So you need to support us. There are women lay, and I'm sure that the male lay participants of the Plenary Council. That job sucks too. They're crying out for support. They're crying out for people to listen, to hear their stories, to ask questions about the process, and just say, you're doing a great job. Let's move on together. And as Kevin said, that means so much more than just my voice or someone else's voice. We're all the body. It just means so much when we do share our voices together at the smallest level, but let's work out together how to make it a bit louder, because we're coming to the point where we really need to do something.
Yes, I read a piece on synodality today from Lacroix, where the young Dutch Jesuit talked about having boldness, being bold. And I thought that was a great word, because in my youth, I was told not to be bold. But I think we need to be bold, and we need to be bold in what we say and how we say it.
Example is there now in the rest of society. They are showing the church, I'm going to say it, someone like Grace Tame, she is a prophet. Yep. Because there is a point where that institution was not listening, was broken, was corrupted, turning in on itself. Prophets step into that space and break it open. And we need that in the church. We're getting it from Pope Francis, but he needs a bit of backing up.
Yeah. Eleanor, may I jump in here?
Please, I was just about to get you in.
Thank you. I'm not being particularly linear here with my thoughts, but just a couple of things come to mind in the light of what we've covered here and looking at the comments coming through. I agree with Alyssa that the question that was used for the Australian consultation, what's God asking of us in Australia, that was an excellent question. Everybody could engage with that in some way. I think the consultation questions and framework for the Synod on synodality are much more diffuse and complicated, and it's hard to use your time well if you follow that process. So here, I encourage you to be bold and to do it differently. So some people are saying, why can't I send the same submission in that I did? Well, send it in, at least get something in. But you can be like an Australian politician. When they're asked a question and they want to say something else, you say something else. So if that question doesn't suit you, you need the church to hear what you want to say, be prophetic and do that. I think that Kevin, in another context, shared this great example of how to initiate a conversation. And his suggestion was to ask people, what is the church you dream of? What will it take to get us there? What's the church you dream of? What will it take to get us there? If you gathered people together and you had a discussion around those two questions, you would gather the data for a submission very easily. Don't even worry about whether it fits into communion or participation or whatever. There's great overlap between the themes. Just get your thoughts in. Speak up, be bold, as that word has come up now. So, yeah, but someone said they're not the same as they were even a couple of years ago. I'm not the same. I'm more distant from the church than I was when I first put the submission in. What do I think God's asking of us in Australia at this time? I'm not the same person. COVID has had an impact, but a lot of other things have had an impact too. So I would give a different answer now to that which I gave even 2 years ago. So I'm sure many of you would also, if you paused and thought about that too. So speak up, but do it in the way that makes sense to you.
Yes, brilliant. I can totally. Our parish had a group on Sunday, and our sort of question was, what sort of church do you want? And it was a brilliant discussion which just flowed for an hour and a half, and we've come up with a really nice submission from that. So yes, use the headings if they make sense to you, but please just think about what sort of church you want and how we could get there. What are the things we could do to get there? Because I think they're the really important things. I guess I wanted to finish up by asking all of you briefly, what you think the idea of synodality, so that there's the submission process, but there's also the whole idea of synodality as developing a church. How do you think we can make that work in Australia? Andrea.
Well, I just wrote in the chat there, somebody said they feel, as a 73-year-old woman, they feel on the fringe of the church. Well, I found somewhere where I can make a difference, and that's WATAC. So if you can't make a difference in the parish that you're in, find somewhere where you can do what you need to do. You've got gifts, you've got voices, you can make a difference, you can create the church that you want to see. Please do it wherever you can, however you can.
Alyssa.
I love the word development, because the church develops. Some of us get stuck into thinking it has a certain shape, it has a certain look, and it's always been like that. That is not true. Our historians, our theologians show us the church is developing. We are developing as people, and can we support each other to develop in a really healthy way? I guess the thought comes back to my own baptism, my desire to, so strong to be a disciple, to be, the body of Christ that I'm called to be. And what delight it is to know that my vocation is as a theologian, and that I'm here sharing with you. And I want that for every Catholic and for every Christian. I want you to feel that you are developing in your understanding of your living your baptism, because it's not a one-off. We can develop it. We can understand it more, sense of who we are, sense of church, renewal, and dialogue. So I guess that's my thought. Yeah, mature Catholics. That's what St. Paul said. Let's get off the milk. Let's start chewing on the tough stuff. And history shows us, our saints show us, it's really hard. And I know that the people listening, it is really hard. But we're here. We're on Zoom. We've got these groups. We can break out of a parish structure when it comes to gathering as Catholics. We can do it.
Kevin, the last word.
Thank you. Just to like to follow up on what Alyssa suggested there. I like to imagine Paul of Tarsus writing his letter to the Galatians. He was on fire. He had this notion of freedom, and the freedom of the people of God in his head and in his heart. And he let them have it, straight out in a whole range of ways. I think there's something like that we need right now to develop that sense of freedom in ourselves, a change of culture. So many of our prayers, like in the Mass, from start to finish almost, apart from, and even in the Gloria, it finishes up with asking God for mercy. God already knows all about us. He's given us all that we need. We need to just open our eyes and take it on board. We can see all the problems in the church, but there's a crack in everything, as Leonard Cohen said. That's how the light gets in. And I like looking for those cracks and see if they can be widened a little bit. And I think it is in forums like this where we have a chance to talk about that awareness among ourselves. We have our own voices. We don't need to wait for other people, whether it's our neighbors, people who have disengaged from the church, or authorities within the church. We can do our thing, and we can say where we stand, and I think it's important that we do that. And that is where I see the future for our church. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And much and all as I don't want to bring this to a close, because I'm sure we could go on for another hour. I do want to, but we did promise it would be an hour of your valuable time. I want to thank Bishop Vincent very much for engaging us, for giving us something to really think about as we went on to the rest of the session. To Alyssa for her fantastic presentation, and particularly the visual images. I'm someone who loves visual images. The visuality that matches the words so well, that gives us hope. To Andrea and Kevin for their wisdom and their honesty, and to all of you for your questions, your ideas, your thoughts, your concerns. And I doubt that we have really dealt with many of your questions, but we hope that you will all go forward, and now that you have an extra 2 weeks, go forward and submit lots of submissions. And you can submit them if you want something longer to your own bishops, and you can submit them directly to the Secretariat in Rome. And I really just want, and thank you, James, for managing the IT beautifully as always. And I just want to thank everybody, and to end with the Benedictine blessing of may the divine assistance remain with you always, and with our absent sisters and brothers. Amen.
Amen.